and especially how that might affect young people in the future, and the way that it's going to be transforming the performing arts space is absolutely fascinating, and I think it is really relevant to all of us here today. Right, okay, so it's now almost 5 p.m, which means we have reached time for our very final panel of the day, which is totally crazy. This one is called The Future of Play, How New Technologies Are Transforming Digital Entertainment. So here we're going to have a group of panelists who are going to be kickstarting the conversation about how new technology, how emergent technology is revolutionizing how we interact with and how we talk to our user base. It's obviously an absolutely huge topic, and I couldn't possibly cover all of it now. So thankfully that's not my job. These panelists instead are going to have the unenviable task of trying to summarize this in a single hour. I'd love to hand over to them now.
So our moderator is going to be Sarah Atkinson, who is the Head of Culture, Media and Creative Industries at King's College. We have Anna-Despina Tudor, who is the course leader of MA Virtual Reality at the London College of Communication. Emily Short, who is Chief Product Officer at Spirit AI. Francesca Rosella, who is the co-founder and CEO of CuteCircuit. I think I saw a very cool picture of her on Twitter earlier in an awesome suit. Tara Reddy, who is the co-founder and CEO of Love Shark. And obviously back to the stage, we're going to have Ghislaine Boddington, who is the founder and creative director at Body Data Space. Please give them a huge round of applause.
Also slouch.
Good. So hello there. Yeah, I'm Sarah, Culture, Media and Creative Industries. Can you hear me okay? Hello? You can hear me now. Yeah, I'm Sarah Atkinson. I'm the Head of Culture, Media and Creative Industries from King's College London. Real pleasure to be chairing this panel today. We do have less members in numbers than were advertised in the programme and were just mentioned there. Unfortunately, Tara and Anna are unable to join us, so we only have these 3 members, but hopefully that will mean more in-depth discussion and a chance for lots of your questions too. My brief was to make it as interactive as possible to enable lots of discussion from you, so I won't hog the floor too much with my own questions. But what I've asked each of our panel members to do is just to briefly introduce themselves, what their role is and what they do, and why this topic is so important to them. So I'll, without further ado, do that now.
Right. Okay. Is this the right distance? There we go. I'm Emily Short. I'm Chief Product Officer at Spirit AI, which is a company that creates AI-based middleware and services for games. And our particular area of focus is natural language and conversation, how people interact via dialogue, and that includes both what's spoken and the underlying social messaging of their interactions. So there are 2 products that we apply this to. One of them is Ally, which is a tool for looking at human-to-human interactions in chat communities. So a way to help moderators find problematic behavior, people that they might want to remove from their community, things that they might need to correct, also positive behaviors in the community they might want to reinforce. And then the second product is Character Engine, which looks at communications between players and non-player characters, and how we can make some of our observations, our knowledge and understanding of how people interact in dialogue and socially into actually compelling gameplay that might turn on conversation, might turn on emotional connections with the characters that you're interacting with, and allow those characters to have a more personalized response to who you are and how you're playing. So those are really our 2 sort of areas of focus.
Thanks, Emily. And why would you say this is really important to you today, the future of play?
Well, I think those 2 different products have 2 sort of distinct angles to them, but both of them are really about creating player experiences that are high agency for the player, that are unique, that are reflecting how they want to engage with the game. One of the directions that we're looking at for Ally is how we allow people to set their own parameters about what they want to experience, what kind of input do they want to hear from other people, and have some sort of personal control over how they are in that space.
Thank you. Ghislaine,
Yes, well,
we know you well already.
well, I won't repeat everything that I just had in my presentation, but I'll just add a little bit to it because there's a couple of areas that I work in that I think are important to mention. I do a lot of work around women in tech, and kind of didn't expect to have to be doing so much in that area in my senior years, but realised in about 10 years ago or so that it seriously was not getting better, and if anything, probably getting worse for younger women than it had been for myself in my 30s. So we run a tweet stream called Women Shift Digital, and I work as a trustee with the STEMettes, which is an amazing group of young women who are taking thousands of young girls and women through coding in fun ways, after school clubs and Saturdays stuff, etc. And also I'm the spokesperson for a Deutsche Bank scheme, which is called We in Social Tech, Women Entrepreneurs in Social Tech. And that is tech for good, social impact tech, kind of 3 cohorts we're doing, 3, hopefully 6, that actually are incubated very fast through 6 months of intense inputs to help them get their projects off the ground. Many of them are actually linked to gaming and VR, etc. So I wanted to mention those because I think that we're obviously in the right place to mention it. I know women in gaming we've been following for ages, and vice versa, reciprocal support there. And a lot of gaming women do follow us through, and that we all need to keep working together on that.
Thank you. Francesca.
Hello, everyone. And so I'm actually co-founder and chief creative officer, so I don't want to steal the CEO job from my co-founder. He's even watching us from via Twitch, so really, it's going to try to oust me when I go back. And so at CuteCircuit, we designed the future of fashion, but the thing that we do is that we create wearables that connect people, that allow you to share emotions together. And maybe some of you have seen many years ago, we designed something called the hug shirt. That is a shirt that lets you touch someone over distance, like sharing a hug over distance. So you touch your shirt and it gets recorded, and then your friend on the opposite side of the world receives it, and it says, there is a hug for you, you want to feel it? And they of course say yes. And their shirt is going to get warm and vibrate in the same areas that you touch on your shirt. So we really like this idea that people can connect physically. And over the years, we designed many different kind of like groundbreaking wearables, but we transformed the sound shirt, basically from the hug shirt, we transformed it into a sound shirt. So 3 years ago, we got an orchestra contacting us and saying, do you think that we could use hug shirts to make deaf people feel music? And we're like, well, we can try, because we have the technology there. We can just write a new software and see if we can make this happen. So this is what we did. We created the shirt with way more actuation areas than it had in the beginning. There are now 30 actuation areas all over this shirt. And when an orchestra is playing on stage, we have microphones that capture every instrument and then recreate this sound through touch sensations. And one thing that is very important to us and that we're really paying attention to right now is the inclusivity aspect. Because, I mean, the fact that there are so many games being played all over the world, sometimes some of them are lacking an interface that can make you really feel like you're there. And we know that through touch, you really feel like you're living something real. Because sometimes if you think about, oh, I might have misheard something, or maybe I didn't quite see that right. But when you are touching something, you know that is real and you know that you're there. And that's why we think that touch is so important. And so we're just merging together all these technologies with 3D spatial sound and haptics together so that we can have inclusive audience participation in games and also in other aspects of communication.
Thank you all, working in really exciting spaces. You've kind of preempted my next question, Francesca, so it's okay, you can say a bit more about it as well. But thinking about the positive ways then that these new technologies are transforming digital entertainment, in particular games and play, and thinking about particularly whether these technologies are enabling different audiences, different types of audiences, new opportunities to engage with games who have been excluded previously. So great example already.
Yeah, definitely that. I mean, when we did the sound shirt, there was a whole like part of the world that basically say, well, we never were able to go to a concert before, and now we can take part in a concert. But then also for people that can hear, not just for the hearing impaired, you could actually participate in a remote concert that is being broadcast over the internet, for example. So then at the same time, if you couldn't travel there, you could still participate. And I think this idea that everybody can participate in something. I also think that some wearables are better than others, because if you think about all the wearables that there are in games right now, like these huge goggles, these massive backpacks with a really heavy hard drive in it, I mean, they weigh about 15 kilos. And this precludes a very large part of the audience to take part in the game. Because, for example, if I play one of the games like The Void, like the Star Wars experience. I mean, I get in the void, and really my experience can only last 10 minutes, because with a 15-kilo backpack on my back, I'm not enjoying myself that much. And so I think that if you have like a wearable that is very lightweight, very pleasant to wear, also makes you look like good, rather than just makes you look a bit darky, then you want to play longer, but also like women or children or the elderly can play. So I think it's important to create interfaces that are more pleasant and like more engaging for different kinds of people.
So yes, I mean, absolutely. I know Francesca's worked a long time, so actually we completely follow through on those thoughts. I think for me, the starting point of my work with telepresence, and I think is still my ongoing real passion, is connecting communities, and connecting communities that actually need to be connected. So communities which are enabled by belonging to groups which are beyond their immediate physical environment. So that could be very important if they're isolated by their politics or by their race or culture or their sexual orientation, etc. Finding others that are beyond the norm and not feeling that you're absolutely isolated or the only one there. And also intercultural debate, which has been my key area for many years, and looking at identity and how identity and multi-identity works, and how we can find, obviously, the positive commonalities between us all across the world through these connected scenarios. So that for me is very important. I think the other positive developments which are transforming things is linked to young people and soft skills development. And I see with my sons, even though I have to get them off the gaming sometimes, I am aware that particularly with certain games, it's group work, they're negotiating, they're in real time with their teams. They're actually, my younger son, I'm quite amazed how well he negotiates. You know, he's not like that in real life. You know, he's very good. Problem solving and working with others very well, and of course the creativity and design side that's starting to come into games that allow that, like Minecraft, etc. So those are really positive. And alongside that, an emerging, and I don't quite know enough about it yet, but maybe other people in the audience do, emerging regrowth of what I think is really important, which is the independent server movement. So maybe we can take that to the audience at some point.
Yeah, lots of things there that tie into what I'm seeing as well. So for Character Engine, because we're facilitating communication with characters that can take input from how somebody's interacting in a game, might take input from person moving through VR or an AR space, might take spoken input, typed input, gestures. There are a lot of different ways that you can communicate with the game, which open up a wide range of different types of experience. And then on the other side, what our technology is also able to do is create responses that are really tailored to the person who's interacting. And we see a lot of people coming to us with use cases from outside the game industry or places adjacent to the game industry who are saying, we'd love to use this in education. We'd love to have a teaching character who is able to adapt their vocabulary and their behavior to the person who's learning. We'd love to have gameplay scenarios that enact particular social skills and communicate those, or that teach people to be more confident or comfortable. What if we could build those kinds of interactions? So there's a huge kind of scope for building, using AI to look at how people interact socially, reflecting that back, embodying it back to people in a way that they can actually learn from and gain from. I think also the creative point is a really important one, because beyond the gameplay itself, I see a lot of potential for enabling creators with new technologies. And one of the sort of most exciting directions that I see in the AI space right now is the concept of computational creativity, basically tools that share initiative between the AI part of the tool and a human creator, and allow the human creator to give feedback like, oh, you generated this thing, but it's not quite right in this way, so please tweak it, and have this kind of back and forth. And some of the things that are produced that way are really powerful, really effective, really interesting, really aesthetically challenging, and they allow people who might not have a full set of technical abilities to enter a space. They also allow people who might have a kind of different mobility, different sort of ability to interact physically, to actually be creative in ways that they hadn't previously.
Wonderful. So lots of exciting opportunities that you're outlining there, and potentials for these technologies. So I just want to balance it out before we open up to the audience and think about maybe some of the key challenges, resistances that there are of adopting and implementing such technologies, and in particular into the game space. Have you encountered any of those?
Well, I seem to still have the mic, so I guess I started. So I think there are a number of things about, I think, which are fairly commonly understood, in fact, about how reticent game projects with really large budgets are to take significant risks. And that is an ongoing thing that is always kind of an interesting challenge and barrier. And so getting into some of those really large budget game spaces means either you have to have done a bunch of like prototype work in more of an indie space, or you need to be connecting with a studio that has a really strong, is large enough to have its own kind of R&D contingent or something like that. So there's sort of interesting sort of structural and economic challenges. There are also challenges of kind of design and understanding, because as we open up really different new technologies, we have to catch up with what our design knowledge is about that tool. And we need to not just design, but also like, how do we build a production schedule around this? How do we do all of these things that we know how to do for more conventional gameplay? But as soon as you introduce these unknowns, that becomes more challenging. And then finally, there's the sort of caution that people have, which is less a barrier to adoption and more sort of a thing that people need to think about, as they do adopt, is when we're using machine learning techniques in particular, we're using some of the other technology that's currently emerging. There are lots of ways that those technologies can pick up and reflect back cultural biases that we don't intend to make part of the project that we're building. And so that's another area where it's really important to be mindful and very conscious of the ethical implications of what am I building into this, because sometimes that can be really invisible in the first part of the project. So that's something to give a lot of thought as well.
Cool. So yes, I completely agree on the bias side, and we could probably do a whole panel just on that, because what we've got to remember is that the bias is in many layers of what we're dealing with. It's not just in the people who are doing the software making, etc. It's actually, starts to live within the algorithms, and it's coming from the data itself, what we call dirty data, where it's just not. It's not even relevant to half the or more than half the population. So we're dealing with, it's a bit like giving the wrong medicine to the wrong people, because it's just come from the wrong places. So, and I mentioned, of course, my concerns that we must deal with in some way the issues around biometrics and personal data ownership, and how we deal with that on the emotional side. I think that key to, and always in my work, and this conference is a really positive example of it, is actually how we get more diversification of content, and content which is coming from a much wider range, made by and created by a much wider range of types of people out there, from different cultures, different backgrounds, and obviously from women, not just men. And I still think we're a long way off that, and the problems of the big companies not taking risks is key to that, We need to, I think, also consider not being so fragmented. And I think that on the smaller scale, as many of us in this room are, we potentially need to work together more and to collaborate and to think, well, you're doing something which is similar to me. Actually, should we sit down and talk about this and try and work this out? Because fragmentation of multiple small businesses actually is where we can't move forward into a bigger impact, bigger distribution, and bigger user bases.
So I think I maybe bring it back a little bit on the like VR aspects and versus augmented reality, because right now there is so much focus on virtual reality, but then if you look about what the market is going to do over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see that the augmented reality and the mixed reality markets are actually going to expand about 400 times the growth rate of virtual reality. So it's going to be a really huge market. And I think that, as we were saying in the beginning, there is a really big problem with the interface aspect. Because if you think about the fact that there are 2.2 billion gamers on this planet, so it's like 1/3 of the population, right? And 1.2 billion are playing on PC. And it's a really huge market. It's like 137 billions. And if you think about virtual reality goggles, the sales are about 10 to 16 million per year. And their market is only like 1.6 billion. So everybody thinks, oh, the interface of the future is transforming the industry. All these VR goggles, we should put them everywhere. But actually, it's not true. So I think we are all still on time as designers and gamers to create a new interface that is not out there yet. Because sometimes, like, if you think about all these huge corporations putting all this like same product on the market, and then you feel like, oh, maybe I cannot do that, or maybe I have to comply with creating something just for that platform. That platform is not actually as huge as you think it is. It's just very, very hyped. So I think we can all like think about scenarios in which we create the interface that we really want to dream of, and they makes us be really, really happy.
Thank you all. Okay, so I can now open it up to the floor. So if you've got questions or even comments or things to add, that's absolutely fine. I'll take some of those. So a hand shot up straight at the back, and then I'll come to you after.
Hello. Okay. You spoke a lot about the ethics of collecting biometrics. And saying there needs to be conversations and we need to think of ethical ways of doing this. Do you have any advice for people who are working in this space?
Yeah, let's all get involved in this debate right up. So actually, the Royal Society, some of you may know, put out a report yesterday on neural interfaces and looking at that, the use in medicine, a little bit in gaming. I think it's a bit disappointing, the gaming bit, but and looking at bias, etc. But it's an incredible report. It's called iHuman. It's got illustrative icons for every single type of neural interface in the world that's actually happening already. And it's got major, it's from the science scene. I think probably they haven't been interdisciplinary enough in their approach to actually bringing in the research, but it's a very important document. And I'm going to tweet about it in a minute, but it's up on Twitter, iHuman, if you tweet that, if you look for that. We covered it last night on BBC too, so there's a good programme discussion. And the Digital Commissioner for Biometrics for the UK was talking on that programme too. And the key output from that was, yes, we've got to, everyone's got to be involved in this debate. So there is a lot of discussion. I mean, you know, I can tell you several events that are happening at Nesta, at our University of Greenwich, looking at these discussions around this now. But we need to put our thoughts in and we need to think about what are the solutions to this? How do we actually, positively move towards the use of personal data, particularly emotional and behavioural data, to actually feed us the right things, to make us feel good, to reach us when we want it to reach us, and how do we actually go no when and have the right to say no, I don't want that, thank you, or no, but you're not taking that from me. We have a long way to go on the solutions. Look at China. China's already gone there, and it becomes a citizen marking scheme. So there's a lot to discuss. Get in the debates, read everything there is, create debates around it, get groups going in work to talk about it, Solutions will emerge, but only if we all get involved, and we need to be involved, otherwise the wrong people will make the decisions.
Hiya. So as an interaction designer, I find this extremely fascinating, and I was just wondering, what do you think is like the biggest challenge for interaction design in this space? Because for me personally, I think it's traversing the actual physical spaces? Because most of us live in quite small spaces. So how do you think that would be solved, or what do you think is the most important thing in that area? Does that make sense?
You're talking about like the physical space in which you interact, or?
Yeah, I mean, just like in terms of like what is for you like the biggest challenge in that area? Like, sorry, it's just like.
Yeah, no, I'm an interaction designer too.
Oh, okay.
So I feel you. I think sometimes as interaction designers, we are not like so like a strong will to try to impose our will on other people.
Yeah.
I find this like with interaction designers, we're always like so open to the user's feedback, because the user is always right. They were like, yes, the user just is telling me what they want, and I probably like I designed the wrong thing, so I need to get everybody's feedback. So I think that definitely like one challenge should be that we should all get everybody, like who we are designing for should be like who we should seek the feedback from. So for example, I don't just design something because I think it's cool, I do that too, but then I just, as soon as I do that, I just give it to people and say, try, test it, tell me what you think. And I think that's like the most challenging aspect of lots of these technologies that are coming out right now, that probably nobody listened to the users, because otherwise they would have designed it a little bit different. So I think it's just trying to do lots of testing along the way to make sure that you incorporate that feedback into the final product. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Did I quite answer your question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling to articulate the question. It's just.
There you go.
Yeah, it's just because like if you look at VR at the moment, it's a very important piece of technology that's come out, but there's very few like meaningful experiences that are coming out. Like I've tried things like VR chat, things like that, which is fun, but like it's a very non-safe space. Like people who log into that is just like not great people, and when you're trying to actually like having a meaningful interaction with someone, it's really hard because you don't have like haptic feedback, or it's hard to move through a space, or it's hard to really feel that you're there. And I'm just like wondering, like, I guess my question is, what's the next big thing for you as an interaction problem that you need to solve, other than just putting on goggles and imagining you're in a virtual space? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, the things that I'm very, very interested in are more like to do with like physical immersion, and sort of like this idea that you can forget where you actually were and just live in this parallel reality. I do not think that living in this parallel reality should be done by covering your eyes. I find that extremely kind of like discomforting, like a very uncomfortable like kind of feeling in which like you don't know like if you're about to bang into a wall, even though it's more or less mapped, when like you can map it in the Oculus thing, but like when you start to exit there, then it breaks your immersion. It's like the suspension of disbelief that you just really want to overcome. And I think sometimes you can overcome it better when you have other senses involved, rather than just covering your eyes with something. So I think don't focus on like just designing for VR.
Yeah, no, I think just to take it through to because you used the word traversing, and I was thinking about the way that we worked with telepresence from the early 90s. A lot of that 10 years was spent what we called navigation and orientation methodologies that we developed, which would enable us to, if I was in London and my dancing colleague was in New York, and we had a lag of 1 minute, we were dealing with lag then all the time, working out the lag first, but then actually having certain methodologies to set up where we were centered in a space, how we would actually integrate together, how we would reach each other, etc. Navigation orientation as you're working between two spaces and actually into a third space, which is the virtual space itself. So, and I think that the one of the issues that's happened for gesture tech, actually, gesturing in gaming and gesturing linked to gaming, has been that the original gesture interfaces that came through, it wasn't a problem about gesturing, it was a type of gestures that were used, which weren't actually very normal for us to do. So, we're not used to going like this to get something to happen. Yeah, we are used to touching things to get something to happen, which is why touch interaction became very, very simple for us. It's inherent in us. So my advice would be always involve. It's the user stuff. I absolutely agree with you on. It's that integrate. But actually, I'd say even more and more actually in many situations now, when you're starting work on a new product, if it's got an element of it which is, say, movement, physical movement, involve a choreographer or a dancer at the earliest stages of your development. If it's including, and I'm saying this to obvious people like Isabel, you know, neurologists should be involved at the earliest stages of development of any tools around that. Health and well-being people of all types, biologists, physiotherapists, people who are body experts, there's many sports people, etc., whose baseline expertise is the body and the body knowledge. Don't even start on your project without involving expertise from that area, if you know, if possible, within the team, yeah, and use that to gain your knowledge about it before you even start with the user side, yeah.
So this is a somewhat different angle because most of what I'm concerned with is not about sort of physical space management, but adjacent to that, we're doing a lot of work with voice input or natural language input. And again, that's a space where people don't necessarily know what to expect from it. There's an evolving kind of set of expectations as people, you know, start playing games with Alexa and that kind of thing. But there's definitely a lot of interesting challenge there about creating user literacy by communicating what is possible in this space, by giving a lot of input to them in, you know, the character's going to start out by asking you questions so that you can answer and feel like you're in an interaction that you understand before we just kind of open things up and be like, well, what do you want to say? Because what do you want to say is a question that actually paralyzes players a lot of the time. They find it sort of like, I don't know, like the sort of idea of like, I'm on the holodeck and I can be James Bond, but I'm not cool enough to be James Bond. What do I do now? So kind of creating that design language, communicating clearly, this is the kind of thing that we're going to understand from you. We're going to lead you through some initial interactions that communicate that and that feel good, and then we're going to gradually open up a space where you know what kinds of things to say and what we're going to do with what you've said. So there's just a lot of kind of creating that understanding within the design of individual games, and then I think building up you know, cultural understanding of how to play this kind of experience. There's a cultural understanding of how to play a first-person shooter now that didn't exist 40 years ago. So it's possible in other spaces too.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. Another hand there, and then we'll go there. Got the mic.
Hi. So I heard you talking a lot about bodies and movement and things like physical contact. And I was just wondering, when you're progressing forward with new technologies and not only thinking about how it's transforming digital entertainment, but how it's maybe transforming accessibility, and when you're creating and innovating, thinking how do we make these experiences, where accessibility comes in that conversation, and how you're thinking about that when you build your technologies.
So for our work, definitely, we are very interested in getting much larger participation into these immersive experiences, and we design for larger and larger environments, actually, and bigger crowds. And but what that does mean, and I'm totally with Francesca on this, you know, is that we are avoiding the multiple big wearable scenario, and definitely the VR headset scenario for any larger scale environment, whether it's a big entertainment centre or whether it's a festival or whatever, is extremely hard to enable enough access. Yeah, even if you've got 40 VR stations down a row, you get the same people queuing all the time. It's mainly guys actually in the queue, and nobody else gets near it, you know. And so we tend to avoid that. I think that also, for me, what's really important is demystification of these scenarios too, because actually, of course, you know, we've still got an older generation, as well as many people who just, you know, haven't had the access at all yet to any of this tech, who are fearful of it, who feel it's not for them, it's beyond their income. Somebody mentioned before income accessibilities, etc., and how we actually get that to be, you know, made into, and gaming is the way to do that, made into more fun, easygoing, and open environments. So
I think that it's a really interesting question, and I think I have an example that is really nice. The other night, like Saturday night, we had to party until 3 a.m., which sounds like, yeah, it's really fun, but actually we were sort of mandatory partying, because if that thing exists, everybody wants to do it. And because we were basically doing like this party with like 1,500 people, but many of these people were actually deaf, and that was their first time going clubbing with their friends, also deaf, and they were wearing the sound shirts. And so we were getting the live feed from the DJ, and they were getting this sort of left and right and bass, mid, high, treble in their garments, and they could really feel the rhythm. I have a really great video actually of these lovely deaf twins, and at a certain point you can see them start doing this, and they're totally on the beat, and I was amazed. But the thing that was even more amazing is that in this area where we were, there were also like older ladies, because part of the event was to be really, really inclusive. So there were these like grandmamas in their 60s and 70s, and they saw everybody having so much fun with the shirts that they say, oh, can we give it a go too? And so we put these shirts on this grandmama that had been sitting basically down the whole evening, just enjoying the music and the drinks. And like as soon as they put the shirts on, they started dancing. I mean, I think it's an amazing thing. I mean, for me as a designer, I'm just like, my mind is blown. Because I'm like, okay, we designed this for a specific set of people, and then we got all their friends participating, the blind guys participating, and even the grandmama. So I think it's just like my dream come true to see something like that happen in an environment with so many people. So I think it's just like trying to really be like, I mean, you shouldn't try to be inclusive, you should just like feel the inclusivity within you. And I think just getting the people to use it is just amazing.
Yeah, so again, a lot of what we're doing is less in that kind of physical space, but when we're dealing with voice, with dialogue, interactions in general, there are spaces of gaming that for a long time are the areas that have been more accessible to visually impaired users, for instance. So interactive narrative that is rich in text and rich in description and rich in dialogue, that's an area that actually, there are entire communities of players who have only been able to play those. And so we try and continue to engage with those communities, be conscious of that, and then also adopt kind of best practices about how do other media communicate and make use of subtitling or audio description or those kinds of things. So there's kind of a range of best practices out there that we can try and adapt in. And then, of course, there's the actual testing.
We had a question over this side, didn't we? Yeah.
My question is actually very much related. I was wondering, Emily already answered the question actually. Do you think this all new technologies have any way to maybe link and start working with bigger gaming companies in order to make accessibility for people with disabilities much easier? Because it is quite known, tricky situation right now that due to new US law, every new game or every bigger game needs to have accessibility right now for all the players, so all the players are actually being included. And I was wondering if we can go a little bit over just text to speech. Do you think that maybe any of the new technologies you're using could be used as well for this to make these games easier and open for everyone?
Yeah, no, I think I already answered a bit, but I'll dig into that slightly more and then pass on the mic. There's a lot that we're seeing right now in progress in AI for being able to recognize and describe things, being able to kind of adjust difficulty or direct people's attention to things. So I'm thinking of cases where people sort of have some sensory impairment, but also cases where the user might be older or younger, might have a less good memory. Are there use cases? One of the use cases that we've discussed with one of our clients is for being able to kind of have descriptions adapt to how long has it been since the players engaged with this, and how well do they seem to remember or understand what's going on. So that kind of use case, you can imagine like somebody who might be elderly and have some difficulty remembering things, or a young child. You could see all of these kinds of different ways that you could approach adapting, reminding people where they are, what's going on in the quest, having the NPCs talk to them like in different vocabulary with more or less complexity. There's just a huge range of possibility. As soon as, and one of the sort of major things that technology is able to do to help with that is all of the sort of generative dialogue that we have, and the ability now, as we're seeing sort of better and better text-to-speech voices, better and better performances, automated, as we can get away from having to have absolutely all of those interactions voice acted and recorded in advance, they can become much more flexible and much more adaptive to the experience of the user.
And this is a key debate in design anyway, so even beyond the gaming world is actually design, diversity and inclusivity by design. Yeah, so actually taking as your lead user a person or an idea of a person even who has the most complex accessibility needs, and designing to that from the beginning of your process. And that's where these regulations are starting to come from. So there's a lot of discussion about this in the design sector overall. There's an exhibition coming up at University of Greenwich and a day of talking in the next month around this. I think we all need to just start to think like that. Don't think, oh, well, we don't have to do that bit. Yeah, actually just do the whole lot from the beginning. So it's not about adaptation, actually. It's about actually by design, you include as many people, the widest sense of what you can out there. And then all you're doing is widening your consumer base and your market possibilities by doing that.
Sometimes when you think about inclusivity, I think many maybe larger corporations or like even companies that are starting out do not think about like inclusivity as an aspect that is really integral to your product. But if you think about how many disabled people are out there, there are 1.3 billion. And 700 million of those, so 1/10 of this planet, are either hearing or sight impaired. So, I mean, this is just a really massive amount of people. We're not talking about like 1 million people, 5 million people, 700 million people out of 1.3 billion. So I think it's just really important that they are seen as customers, users, people that want to enjoy an experience. So it's just like, if you start designing for people that have some kind of impairment, then the interface is gonna end up being much, much better for everybody else.
And actually, if you look at technologies for special needs and disability from the 90s through, you'll see, and it's what your point was actually, you said, the link up of those that have developed really well, it's fascinating actually, have been some of the things that have come through for all of us as making technology and gaming much easier. So keep an eye on what's happening, because some special needs and disability technologies are actually, well, obviously really useful for seniors, and as longevity becomes part of life, those are needed more and more. But equally, they are definitely you can work with this Global Disability Hub. There's loads of tech hubs looking at that. Just get together. It's what I said earlier, just actually keep matching and sharing and linking. Don't reinvent the wheel again and again.
Go there then. Got the microphone. Where's the microphone? There's a person. Can you maybe shout the question?
For most people, especially when it comes to something that has to do with enabling impaired people to do things. And actually, I think of the charity Special Effects that develops technology exactly so that people with disabilities can play games, but they depend a lot on donations and funding and everything, because those new technologies are very expensive. So my question is just in terms of what's your view, is it possible to have new technologies that are inclusive, that are accessible, and at the same time affordable?
So I think some of the solutions that we've been talking about, not all of them, but some of them are software based in a way that they can scale up, they can be deployed in the cloud, they can work for users in much the same way as a lot of sort of other features that are available to gaming. So I don't think that there's sort of like, oh, all of this has to be impossibly difficult. I think there are some cost challenges, especially for actually the whatever company is creating the experience, when you get into some of the AI-based solutions, there can be significant costs around getting access to data sets, doing the training. So those are spaces where there are some barriers. And the way I see those barriers playing out, again, is not necessarily in terms of affecting what players are able to use the system, but rather the corporations making decisions about, okay, clearly it's worth me doing all of this expensive training for English, but is it worth doing that for some minority language? Probably not. So then you get these sort of geographical, accessibility issues as well. So there's sort of interesting things that cross multiple ways there.
I think I kind of answered it in terms that I do think we've got to stop reinventing the wheel and work together. So find those partners, search out, reach out to people who are already doing that in a similar way to possibly to what you're looking to do. And yes, there's always going to be some cost on actually for crossover and cross-platforming and whatever else. But and just look at that from the beginning, because it costs less if you're looking at it from the beginning of a creation process.
I give you a concrete example of like something, for example, that we are doing with the sound shirt. Like when orchestras have a sound shirt, actually a person that is deaf or blind can just give them a call, or send them an email and book it, so they don't have to pay for it. So I think that now, obviously, we have this version of the sound shirt that is more like a business to business. So we're giving it to museums and orchestras, and then whoever goes to see an exhibition or a concert can just have it for free. But then on the consumer version that we're working on still, just be patient. The idea that we want to do is just actually that you can sort of like buy your own and then just pay it forward for somebody else. So it's sort of like something that we have like in Italy, and it's very popular with coffee shops even here. You can buy a coffee for someone else when you buy your coffee. So I think that we should be a little bit like more generous, and sort of like if we were lucky enough to be able to afford something, then maybe we should pay forward a little bit for somebody else and give back.
So my question's kind of directed towards Emily, but I'm going to open it up in that, what do you say to people who are sort of genuinely afraid of AI? And I want to open it up to Ghislaine and Francesca by saying, what do you guys say to people who are genuinely afraid of sort of, you spoke about, Ghislaine, body modifications and implants, cyborgification, and wearables definitely comes into that. So what do you say to people who are sort of really pushing back and sort of doomsday in this area?
Okay, so I mean, the AI in general point, I think the biggest doomsaying sort of that I see in culture as a whole is this sort of like, oh my God, what if we train up an AI and it becomes smarter than humans and decides to kill us all? It's like, well, like I've been working on this for a long time, and it's really, really hard to make an AI even a tiny amount close to that smart. So I'm really not like afraid of that emerging in the very near future. And I think that's a case where a lot of the time the conversation is an educational one. It's like, okay, well, like let's unpack what you're afraid of, what you're imagining here. Let's talk about how this actually works. Like, no, the thing that somebody built in their lab is not going to get loose on the internet and like destroy humanity. Okay, but there are things that are genuinely valid, I think, to be afraid of in this space as a whole, and we need to be having those conversations too. I think, the questions raised earlier about privacy of data tie in very heavily with AI. AI lives on data. It incentivizes corporations and governments to collect as much information as possible and to use it in a diverse range of ways, which might not be to your personal advantage. And those are things that, should be admitted, should be talked about. The bias issues in the data that we're collecting need to be discussed. Then there are some sort of subtler fears that I run into with people where several friends of mine who are writers in the game industry were kind of freaked out when the news about GPT-2 broke, which is a model that builds natural language. It's more persuasive than previous AI-based natural language. And several of my friends were like, is my job going to be obsolete? And like genuinely really concerned about that. And there again, like, yes, there are economic impacts from developing AI in particular directions. And we can only address those kind of concerns by having a really solid conversation that actually goes beyond the technology to what kind of culture, what kind of society, what kind of economy do we want to have? What are the things that we're willing to hand off to algorithms? How do we deal with the fact that maybe there isn't enough work to go around eventually, and then we need to rethink how we value people in society? And that is a big philosophical and ethical conversation that we absolutely should be having a lot. But I think, really sort of the tack is like, let's dig into what these fears are about. And, since I raised it, what I say to people who get specifically afraid about AI taking over their creative voice, like the sort of writer of like, oh, if there's a model that can build, text, like, does anybody need to hire me to write text? The thing is that all of those AI models are based on human data input to start with, and they are not going to originate new perspectives on what the world is like, what it's about, what our life means as humans. We have to be doing that work. So there is a place for us to be continuing to do that in a creative form and communicating in our society. So apparently the way that I handle this question is to get like increasingly philosophical about it. But I think I think that there's really meaningful work for us to be doing as people around those fears.
So, yeah. One thing, I work a lot on AI stuff too, and particularly around future of society, future of work, future of creativity, and the fears are there. What always amazes me is how it's talked about as an it rather than a process. Yeah, AI is a process. Yeah, it's a process which is attached to other things to make them go further and do other things. So, but fear is there always, and thank you for your question. I think it's a very important one, because actually, even if we all look at each other now and look around each other now, even in this room, there's always a judgment of the other, and this room's full of others. As soon as I walked in today, I thought, oh wow, great, a room full of others, with pink hair, with green hair, and all different sizes, and wow, we're mainly women, and we're in gaming, yeah? This is otherness, yeah? And fear is about otherness, yeah? So, and we know that judgment of otherness and is what is probably the biggest problem in the world, yeah? Why we're constantly having wars and upsets and political shoutings, etc. So everybody is somebody's other. If you look and judge somebody for being other to you, then you have to accept that they can do that back. Yeah. So now, in terms of the cyborg developments and post-human, transhumanism, trans species, it's massive developments happening. It's just a one gradient on the, one end, possibly, extremities of it, of being human. And actually, talking about this a lot with special needs and disability people too, actually, it's a bit of a relief, actually, for many disabled people and special needs people that this world starts to be discussed, that it's not about being normal. What is normal? Yeah, normal actually shouldn't even exist, that word. I think we should ban it, yeah? So, and the cyborg culture and the special needs and disability cultures, the Paralympics did so much to shift this. Actually from shifting people from being, oh, you're in a wheelchair, just stay there, you're other to us and we'll hide you in a corner, to actually people being enhanced and superhumans to a large extent. So we have a massive shift in perspective of what being other in terms of bodies is in the world today. So I think that's another reason why we should integrate this accessibility right at the beginning of a design process and make sure it's there for all, because the more we all do towards that, the more those fears disappear.
Going back to your question in the beginning, it was like, oh, you're so scared, like if you have to put a wearable on or become a transhuman. But actually, the first question I always get is like, am I going to get electrocuted? I was like, no, the answer is no, because there are some wearables that are a bit scary out there that are very high voltage, ours are not. So yeah, we thought about that first. But I think for example, when you talk about prosthetics, we were chatting with a Paralympian, and really, they are very happy if you can create a prosthetic that has superpowers. Like, for example, not just a superpower, it makes you run faster, because yay, everybody would want that, but you're not allowed, actually. You sort of have to be within certain standards. But for example, we were talking about, oh, could it be made more comfortable? Could you just make it with a cooling system in it, so that if we go to the Tokyo Olympics and it's very, very hot, then I don't get chafing around the thigh, and I'm not going to get blisters, and then I can actually compete rather than being in pain. So I think that it's very important to think about like which innovations that go on the body we want to create, and also like, are they really helpful? I mean, if you just want to grow a third arm because you want to, I don't know, grab something up there that you couldn't reach before, maybe that's going to be a bit uncomfortable. But actually, if you want to use it to sort of extend your senses, or like do like kind of a performative act, I think that that's totally allowed, and actually is very beautiful too.
And I think we're not so far off a future where there may be 3 to 4, 5, 6 different types of Olympics, from the total natural to the absolutely extended enhanced human. So, you know, these shifts will happen. They will allow those super enhancements to come through. So we've also haven't talked a lot about neural neural interfaces, and also drug enhancement too. These are all big, big shifts that are happening in the world.
You had a question back, didn't we? Just
how close is that? Okay, it's working. Hi, so I am a UI programmer, and I'm used to building these really flat, standard kind of ways of interacting. It's like text and just 2D, and it sounds like the future is this very immersive, very physical feedback and ways of communicating and interacting. So how do we, like, for those of us who are out there building it, how do we prepare for that kind of transition into like a very different future?
thank you. Just to say, this is the last question, so make it a good answer.
When you're giving it to
No
me,
pressure.
because I like to build all things that are physical interfaces. So I'm the culprit here and the scapegoat to this discussion. Yeah, and I think that, like maybe like just do research and see like what's out there, and especially I think it's very important. Try whatever is out there. Like, because sometimes I think we get really stuck into thinking we want to design something, or like a product like might be really good or really bad, and you never know until you actually try it yourself and experience it and see what it allows you to do. Like, for example, I tried the Oculus goggles, the Vive, but then I also tried the Magic Clip. And I mean, it's not as cool as I think it is. So I mean, the idea is great, but it's not quite out there in terms of resolution. So I think it's very important to try every single thing, like even the really cool domed hologram that Ghislaine was showing earlier. And you know why she knows why there is the dome. The dome is there because actually if you try to stick your little finger in it, this thing is moving up and down really fast, and you don't get amputated, I asked. But still, you kind of get a little bit of a slap on your fingers if you try to stick it in there, because it's really literally moving up and down really, really fast on this 3D axis, so that the little light that is going on and off with persistence of vision just stays in your brain, and you can see it as a 3D object. So I think it's very important to go out there and see all the technologies and try to experiment and touch them and see what happens, because then it gives you so many amazing ideas of what you could do better. Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely right advice, totally. And the other thing is really trust your intuition. Actually follow your nose on it. What is it that you want? What is it that you feel is not happening for you with tech? How could it work better for you yourself or for people around you? And start to feel it, just sense it rather than verbalize it, or, you know, actually, and particularly when trying other things, how could those things go further for you? What is if it's not quite right about that for you? I mean, we're all unique, and some of us will be much more visual, much more physical, much more reactive to voice, etc. That's why we have to have this width of accessibility, because people will enter things and get engaged and immersed in them through different senses, which are possibly enhanced in each of us in different ways. So really feel yourself into this stuff and try to, you know, follow with your nose, your intuition. What is it next? What's missing? What's needed in there? And that's done by trying loads of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, those are such excellent answers that I'm not going to be able to kind of exceed them. I think the one thing that I would throw in there from an experience that I had and this gets back to something I was saying earlier about players being afraid in voice interface contexts. Like, be conscious of how the user might feel comfortable or apprehensive about interacting with a new interaction type. And also, if you are building something that allows the user to sort of set that interaction the way they want it, also be very conscious of how you're inviting them to do that. So an example from a past project a number of years ago, I was working on an interactive narrative experience where the different AI characters were saying things and their dialogue would appear on screen, and we knew that we needed to make the reading speed adjustable because different people would want to experience that at different rates. And that was easy enough to do as a UI exercise, but what we found was in our initial beta tests that people felt bad about turning the reading speed down. They felt like they were admitting to being stupid. And so this was giving them a negative experience. Like, we thought, oh, we're making this easy to use. We're making it like something that can go however you want it. But it was nonetheless creating this sort of weird reaction that people had about they felt judged by how they fit the technology. And that was something that I had never encountered before and hadn't really expected, but is really something to watch out for in this space.
You. Sadly, that was the time for our last question. We have to finish now, so thank you for all your brilliant questions. It stimulated some really interesting responses and debate there. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panellists today, Francesca, Emily and Ghislaine.